Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, at the end of every episode, I always say that this podcast is not about me or even the guest. It's about you and your story and everyone listening and how you're solving real-world problems with technology. So when I received an email from a listener asking to come on and have a chat with us today, of course I said yes. And his name is Stephen Hegenderfer, Senior Director of Developer Ecosystems at Semtech. And I invited him on the podcast today to learn more about how they're helping developers bring their ideas to life and also close the skills gap that so many companies around the world are facing right now by offering resources for education and training purposes, etc. And I also want to learn a little bit more about their new portal that comes at a time when building IoT devices and solutions are more complex than ever before, and developers need additional resources to build and test device connectivity efficiently. And I want to do all that in a language that everyone can understand. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Seattle in the US so you can join me and Stephen in conversation now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about your journey, how you got here, and ultimately share your origin story?
Yeah, you bet. So my name's Steve Hegenderfer, and my journey starts a long time ago as a mainframe COBOL programmer. So for those of you listening, I've just dated myself. Did a lot of early work, mainframe COBOL stuff, decided that I really didn't like that at all, and decided to go and learn Windows programming. And at the time, Visual Studio was king. And so did a lot of Windows GUI development over that time, did a lot of really fun things. And for whatever reason, that kind of led itself into a lot of work around startups, specifically in the Bay Area. It was doing a lot of work, with different companies, starting them up, working on all kinds of cool stuff. And at the time, and this is around 2000, a lot of internet startups, right? And so I kind of got my internet bug there. But like any good person, I live in the Seattle area. So like any good person that lives in the Northwest, you have to do your time at Microsoft. Yeah. And I spent a really enjoyable part of my career at Microsoft doing a lot of embedded work, mobile and embedded work, super fun, super interesting stuff. But that led to a whole bunch of other stuff. I went from Microsoft to Qualcomm to Bluetooth to Hitachi, working on connectivity, working on Internet of Things, working on all kinds of really interesting projects. And that kind of led me to where I am today at Semtech.
Wow, what an incredible journey you've been on now. And of course, fast forward to 2022.
Yeah, exactly.
You are now with Semtech, which is a global supplier of high-performance analog and mixed-signal semiconductors and advanced algorithms for infrastructure, high-end consumer industrial equipment. Now, that is quite a mouthful. So can you set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving for businesses?
Yeah. So my business unit inside of Semtech focuses on connectivity and Internet of Things. And so the types of problems that we see today are actually pretty different than even just 5 or 10 years ago. Today, we're focusing on connecting everything, our families, our houses, our neighborhoods, our cities. This connectivity is now trending to wireless connections as cables just aren't feasible for many things. This is really just the evolution of the Internet of Things, though. And not only are we striving to connect everything, the distances and topographies are really different for what we see are trying to connect. For instance, your home has one set of challenges, but a large industrial plant or a city has an entirely different set of challenges. So connected devices need to be able to adapt to these challenges. And IoT solutions need to be able to perform in spite of these challenges. So layer on top of that, the need to be energy efficient, and you have even more constraints. And this is really, Neil, where Semtech comes in. We're really striving to provide that connectivity between devices or sensors that make up a large portion of the Internet of Things and the applications that will work with those devices, whether they be on device or in cloud. The device to cloud or application issue is one that I call the last mile. Like, what do you need to do to solve that last mile issue, to actually connect these sensors and devices so you can take advantage of the data that they're sending. And that's really what Semtech does with LoRa and LoRaWAN, the technologies that we employ to solve these issues, is helping to solve those last mile connectivity issues with long range, low power wireless solutions.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the reasons that I invited you on the podcast today, and one of the things that put you on my radar, was after I learned a little bit more about your developer portal. And it's described online as a place to learn, connect, collaborate, and find resources to help accelerate that development process that you just mentioned. But can you offer an overview of the kind of features that you can expect in this portal?
Yeah, absolutely. So the portal itself is pretty standard from a developer portal perspective. We have main functional areas. And within our developer portal, we have 5: learn, build, solutions, documentation, and community, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll kind of describe each one of those very briefly. Within learn, you get what you need to start learning about LoRaWAN and LPWAN technology. We have hands-on labs, interactive tutorials, blogs, videos, and probably what I think is one of the most valuable resources on our portal is the LoRa Academy. The LoRa Academy is actually a great resource for people that are starting to learn about LoRaWAN. I kind of call it LoRaWAN 101, where you go in and you not only get theory and best practices, but you get some practical hands-on things as well. So that's learn. In build, you'll find what you need to start building solutions. You'll find software, evaluation kits, and services. The solutions area contains everything from a catalog of different industry solutions and partners who provide them, to links to case studies and various starter kits. The starter kits are actually pretty interesting, and they're focused around particular areas like asset tracking or smart buildings. And they really contain everything you need to effectively get up and running as a proof of concept. So think of them as like starter kit in a box. Documentation contains exactly that: technical docs, specifications, data sheets, as well as white papers and best practices guides. And the community houses our forums, in fact, and there you can ask and answer questions about the technology. So that is the developer portal in a nutshell, and those are the types of things that we offer on it.
And two big technologies we're seeing almost converging at the moment is 5G with its low bandwidth and IoT devices. So I'm curious, do you have any examples of or use cases of how developers can test and build things like IoT devices connecting with that LoRaWAN on the portal there that you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and one of my favorite, I think one of the coolest features, but it's definitely one of my favorite features of the developer portal, is the Semtech network server. Yeah. And the Semtech network server is a full-featured LoRaWAN network server that we offer for free for developers to use and build and prototype on. It's based on ChirpStack, so it's an open source, readily available network server. It's very easy to use. It's free, and it's great for prototyping and testing as you start to build your solution. So whether you are buying, let's say, devices or sensors off the shelf and you're creating cloud solutions, or whether you are actually creating the embedded devices and the applications on the devices, the Semtech network server gives you a free online area to experiment, to play, to prototype, and to really test your devices. The nice thing about it is, since it's based on ChirpStack, and ChirpStack is an open source repo for a network server, anything that you do in the Semtech network server, you can deploy that exact same thing for yourself, whether you want to deploy that on-premise or in your own cloud for your own solutions as you get ready to go into production. But I think that's my favorite thing on a tangible tool that helps developers build and prototype and get to market fast.
And of course, in this digital world now, it's actually run by the need for developers. And I'm going to date myself now. I almost remember that Steve Ballmer clip. Remember where he's just going developers.
Developers. Yes. Love that. I just reminded my team of that the other day.
Oh, man. But there's so much talk at the moment about the digital skills gap, the lack of developers, etc. So can you tell me more about the skills gap that you're seeing companies facing at the moment from the conversations you're having with customers?
Yeah, and it's real. I think that the problems people are trying to solve are just getting bigger and more complex. And with every iteration of technology, we seem to find ourselves with a lot more possibilities, which means solving for bigger issues. But these aren't necessarily insurmountable issues, right? I mean, these types of things always tend to bring a gap in learning until the new technologies are well known and understood. For instance, I always look at the cloud, right? Several years ago, there was a large gap in understanding the cloud and the skills to harness that technology. But now with wider adoption of the cloud, you're seeing those gaps decreasing. Right now, though, I think the big thing is IoT and the complexity around that. And it's really not any individual piece, but the sheer amount of different technologies that make up this space is huge, right? You've got devices and sensors, you've got cloud, you've got networking, you have application work, you've got data processing and analytics, there's machine learning. So, the skills required to effectively bring IoT solutions to life are varied and many. And that creates this natural gap until things get easier, until people kind of coalesce around certain technologies and tools get a bit better and more standards are adopted. And I think that, we're talking about education and these education gaps and new technologies, and standards are a big thing, I believe. With technology advancing at the pace that it is, having industry standards, I believe, is super important. And this is one of the big advantages of a technology like LoRa or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, right? You have hundreds of companies coming together to advance the common goal of that last mile of connectivity and connecting these IoT devices in a standardized way that can help promote interoperability. And so I think the standards are a big part of, kind of addressing this digital skills gap as we move forward.
And I think also, especially with the IoT expansion, it's not just about attracting new developers into the community, but also a need for developers themselves to continually be learning. So how are you helping on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Education is key. And this is actually why we launched the LoRa Developer Portal, is to try to help address the issues developers are facing when they're creating their IoT solutions. We try to provide best practices, technical direction via papers and documentations and labs, learning tools like the LoRa Academy and hands-on labs and interactive tutorials, and tools to help developers build and prototype with, like the Semtech network server. But we also make sure that we adhere to things like the LoRaWAN standards, which are provided by the LoRa Alliance, right? And as we just talked about, standards, I think, are important in this ever-growing, ever-widening world of IoT. And I really believe that they're going to help create consistency in the type of IoT applications that, in our case, use LoRaWAN technologies and help advance interoperability.
So how do you think, if we zoom out a minute, how do you think the portal and similar platforms out there can help other industries, such as, let's say, manufacturing? Yeah,
it's funny. I used to spend a lot of time in manufacturing, and it was super interesting to go on premise and look at these companies and what they're trying to do and what their developers are trying to do. And then you've got, IT, information technology, versus OT, operational technology, and how those two groups come together for something like manufacturing. And I think the developer portal, our developer portal specifically, has a couple of things to help industries like manufacturing get a leg up, and to help OT and IT kind of come together to build and prototype solutions. First, I think for any industry, you need a lot of good documentation and use cases, right, on how to help solve problems and solve issues in those areas. And the developer portal has that. So people can go to the site, search for answers to what they're looking for, search for case studies on similar things that they are looking at providing solutions for, and get an idea for what those solutions might be and what they might look like. But we also have very practical tools to help developers build and prototype their solutions, like the Semtech network server. And we provide this stuff for free. So you can actually see how your devices and applications might work in a production environment, test them out while you are prototyping and building to make sure that you're doing the right things in a friction-free, no-cost or very low-cost environment where you don't have to worry about standing up that environment. We have it set up for you. So you can actually get in there, test your solutions for your particular industry, before you go into production.
And as someone that's working right in the heart of this space, I suspect that you're monitoring tech trends continuously. And
Yeah.
is there anything, obviously there's a lot of hype out there, but is there anything that excites you?
Yeah, there's a lot of hype out there. I can't quite get into cyber currency and that kind of stuff. I try. I think that what really excites me are kind of old school stuff. And I say old school, everything's relative, right? Yeah. The concept of smart city really excites me right now. And the reason why I say that is because there's a lot of untapped potential in smart cities and municipalities and things like that. So I think about urban areas that start with something with a problem like utility monitoring or lighting, right? That's kind of where they start. And they say, hey, look, we need to have a way to monitor and automate, let's say lighting across the city. So cities create and deploy these networks. In our case, LoRaWAN networks, these long range, low power networks, right?
Yeah.
They create these networks to handle sensor data for a particular problem, and let's just say lighting, right? But once that network is in place, Neil, it opens up a massive world of potential solutions because now they have what they need in place from a networking perspective to roll out a bunch of additional applications and solutions on that infrastructure. So the smart city, I think, has a lot of potential to help connect not only things within the city, like utility grids and lighting and power and infrastructure, but it also has the ability to connect people and things and assets as they're moving around and within the city. Because now that, a smart city has these networks in place, they really have everything that they need to roll out additional applications and solutions on that infrastructure that they just stood up, right? So this really enables a smart city. And I know that smart cities maybe not the cool, trendy thing, but I think it's a really, really cool concept and one that is being undervalued. We seem to talk about smart cities, but we don't do a lot to enable them. And that's one of the things that I really think that LoRaWAN is particularly suited for, but it's also something that's particularly exciting just because of the sheer amount of solutions that could be deployed in a smart city. So that I think is cool. It may not be the sexy, cool thing today in the industry, but that's what excites me right now.
Awesome. And what's next for you guys? Where do you go from here? What part do you see yourselves playing in that future?
I think that for developers listening to this,
yeah,
it's all about them, right? I mean, Steve Ballmer said it best: developers. We firmly believe that building out the ecosystem, rising tide helps all ships, that working on the ecosystem and helping developers is the best way to solve a lot of these problems. So for developers listening to this, go to the LoRa Developer Portal and check it out, LoRa-developers.semtech.com. As for me, I'm not even close to being done with what I want to make available to developers for free this year on the portal. So come back to the portal, check back often. You'll see more and better tools that will help guide developers on creating great LoRaWAN solutions. We're going to launch a LoRa Academy refresh this fall. So all new content, all updated content, spec compliant content. And we're going to launch a new version of the Semtech network server that's based on the latest version of ChirpStack 4.0 that offers a slew of really great features to make things even easier for developers to get devices up and running off the shelf and to build and prototype solutions with. So that's kind of, I think, next for me. I'm always thinking about the next thing for developers and how I can help developers. And it doesn't stray too far from there. So that's what I'll be working on. That's where we're going to.
Wow, sounds like you're going to be incredibly busy. So we'll have to get you back on later in the year or early next year. Well, we started the podcast talking about your origin story. Now, as we come full circle, I'm going to ask you, is there a song that has inspired you or means something to you, or maybe it's your favourite song that we can add to our Spotify playlist? Guilty pleasures are allowed. All I ask is a reason for your choice.
Absolutely. And I think for all the old school folks listening to this podcast, you're going to like this one. One of my favorite songs all time is by The Police. Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic. And this song, I listened to it today. It holds a really special place in my heart. I used to sing that song to my youngest girl every night for years before she went to bed. So it holds a really special place in my heart. Now that young girl is going to start her freshman year next year in college. And so I get a little melancholy when I hear it, but it's just a great song. The Police are awesome. And, she still knows all the words to that song. So I love that song, and that's my pick for the playlist.
Fantastic choice. It is an oldie but a goodie, and I'm proud to say that Stephen is now going to sing that for us one last time.
Not on this podcast.
I won't put you there.
No. I don't think anyone wants to hear that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I should have asked this at the very beginning, but what's the story behind the name Semtech, the explosive name? It's a great play on words, but I just wondered if there's a story behind that. Yeah,
it's just, semiconductor technology. That's really all it is. And the funny thing about it is, like, Semtech's been around for 60 years. It's an older company, and we do so much more than that. So it's interesting. That's where the name comes from, and it's stuck with us for 60 years.
Love that. And for anyone listening that just would like to continue this conversation we started today, maybe contact your team or just find out more information about anything we discussed, what is the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to LoRa Developer Portal at LoRa-developers.semtech.com. You can always go there and ask questions on the forums. You can also get us direct feedback at developer@semtech.com and follow us at Semtech Corp on Twitter.
Fantastic. Well, I've genuinely loved chatting with you today. We've covered so much in a short amount of time, and there's still so much more to go. I think you're just scratching the surface here, and I'd love to get you back on next year. What I'll do, I'll give you a good 4 months to prepare and come on here and sing the song next time you join me, maybe. But just a big thank you. I just love it when you chat to someone for just a few minutes and you instantly hit it off with them and feel like you can just lower the barriers, have a chat for hours and laugh and joke and have a little bit of fun along the way. And Stephen was one of those guys, and I just cannot thank him enough for coming on here today and coming with that great energy that he has. And do you have a story that you would like to share, or would you like to comment on anything we talked about today? All you need to do is email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. I'm nice and easy to find. And if you'd like to work with me, my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But that's it for today. So a big thank you as always for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.